Well guys, we're finally here. This is part 4 of a 4-part project. To see the other 3, click on the links here. You know, games from licensed TV shows or movies tend to be on the infamous side of gaming. I don't even think I have to talk about the more noteworthy ones like E.T. And at the same time, I don't have to talk about every licensed game in history. But when you have a good developer on your hands, anything is possible. Case in point, developer studio Treasure Games and their wonderful licensed game, Astro Boy Omega Factor. If you don't know anything about this company, then there are 2 things you will know. High stakes action and destruction and lasers. Omega Factor features a lot of things I love to see in a video game. A main character with actual dialogue, upgrades to your arsenal, and like I said before, high stakes action. On an aesthetic level, the game is handled with the utmost care. Astro Boy and his various sprites look incredible, and the enemies he fights are incredibly varied. Bosses come in all shapes and forms, ranging from giant robots to mafia-esque gangsters. I also have to comment that the structure and the playability is incredibly tight, and surprisingly, everything has a lot of fluid animations and proper physics, which is an aspect most licensed games don't even try to attempt. On top of that, there's multiple difficulty modes and a secondary ending, which I will not spoil, mostly because I haven't gotten there myself. It's a well-made game of a long-standing Japanese animated icon. Good on you, lad. My first Kirby game I ever played was Kirby's Block Ball. It was a fun arcade-style Game Boy game, but honestly doesn't hold up as well as I'd wished it would have. From then on, for several years afterwards, I never actually knew what a traditional Kirby game was like. Then along came a magical mirror, and I was sold on the franchise. Kirby and the Amazing Mirror was a special kind of title that has only once been repeated in the franchise. The Game Boy Advance tried its very best to incorporate 4-player functionality in a lot of their games. Most games had minigames, and other games had exclusive multiplayer modes. Kirby, however, doesn't play that way. The entire campaign mode of Amazing Mirror was available for multiplayer. Now that is awesome. But unfortunately, the Game Boy Advance wasn't quite ready to perfect the multiplayer aspect. What with those cords to hook them up and all that. But you know, that doesn't matter, as this Kirby game had by far one of the best single-player experiences I've ever played. If there is one thing unique about this game, then it had to be its layout. At first, it starts out relatively straightforward, but after pressing a big button early in game, you find out that you have an entire overworld to discover. That's right, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror was an expansive, non-linear game. And of course, what would a Kirby game be without his signature talent? Copy abilities. We've got old classics like the Fire and Cutter, and we've also got new and exclusive ones, like the Rocket ability. Yeah, Rocket! Top it off with really fun minigames and a sound room, and you've got yourself a solid Kirby game. Golden Sun. There was something about this particular RPG that had me hooked from the moment I played it. Maybe it was the design, maybe it was the concept, or maybe it was just really good and awesome battling mechanics. I'm not really sure which one I can go with. The design of the game is always what first comes to mind with me, being what I presume to be 3D models translated into 2D sprites with some Mode 7 effects used within the fights. The game is just really colorful, from the trees to the valleys to the cryptic layouts of the caves, to the fascinating structures and buildings throughout. I'd even go to say that this is probably the best looking GBA game I've ever laid my eyes upon, minus some odd effects. The unique battle system was what really sold it to me. Early on in the game, you're introduced to these creatures called Jinn, which are essentially elemental spirits based with specific alchemic properties. These things are your lifesavers. When set for battle, they increase your stats and allow you to better survive against the various monsters you go up against. But this leads to the next awesome thing they can do. Using one or more Jin of a certain element can allow you to use some devastating summon attacks, and aside from being flashy as all belief, can easily help out with the bigger boss battles. And of course, there's the music. Camelot Software sure does have a thing for pan flute music, and the tune for Kalima Forest has got to be one of the most nostalgic tunes in my ears. It's just so calm, mysterious, and enchanting. I'm often left with watering eyes just hearing that melody. Why don't you guys have a quick listen? So beautiful. Huh? Oh, next entry. Summon Knight's Swordcraft Story was not a game I found by conventional means. I never played it when the Game Boy Advance was in the limelight. I never heard about it from friends, Nintendo Power, or even in stores. But then one day, a man by the name of Green Scorpion entered the YouTube fray. He created a video called Top 10 Games You Probably Never Played. Yet. And let it be known that it influenced me to go and play 3 games on that very list. Brutal Legend, Red Steel 2, and of course, Summon Knight's Swordcraft Story. Summon Knight is what you would call an action RPG. Your overall power levels are influenced by leveling up, but you won't do anything if you don't know how to fight. This game offers the ability to have 3 weapons to switch from in battle, and 5 different weapon classes to strike your fancy. Swords, axes, lances, claws, and drills. Each weapon has their own strengths and weaknesses, and the weapon creation system is a really interesting concept. Creating weapons has got to be the best part of the game. You want a better sword? Go ask this guy right here. But you gotta have the materials, and they can easily be found from enemies and smashable boxes. There's even magical powers that you can use as well, such as elemental enchantment for bonus damage, healing spells if you've taken a lot of hits, and others for various other effects. I won't get much to in the story, but I honestly just found it rather boring for a video game. Sometimes it just really dragged on, and I found myself skipping it. I just was not hooked, so to me that loses points. If the story was better, or at least easier to skip, then this probably would have been an instant classic. But I just managed to find a game that balances action and story a bit better on this countdown. Speaking of which... Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories is an amazing action RPG. And by that, I of course mean that subjectively. Whenever this game gets mentioned by other gamers, this and the PlayStation 2 remake definitely gets a lot of flack for its significantly different style of gameplay. Well, if Zelda 2 can get a resurgence of fans, then I don't see why Chain of Memories can't get a second wind as well. So let's talk about the changes that this game made from its predecessor. Instead of a standard beat-em-up style combined with RPG elements, this sequel to the critically acclaimed Disney/Final Fantasy franchise added a little twist. Cards. Cards! So let's talk about the card play. Each card has a number, and whoever has the higher number gets to use their action. You can leave your enemies vulnerable by playing a stronger card, but be careful because your enemies can easily do that as well. 0 cards have the ability to trump any card, but at the risk of being trumped instantly. At times, this feels like the most extreme version of poker ever imagined. Well, until 2009 came around. Sora here can not only lay down the smackdown, but can easily dodge attacks by moving around in the battlefield, jumping, and rolling out of danger. Some cards are needed to progress through doors as well, and it's just easy to do. Just fight some monsters and they'll give you certain cards to open doors. It's just as simple as that. And of course, there's the story. Members of the group called Organization 13 have lured Sora into a castle of many dangers. They attempt to manipulate Sora's memories so they can use them to accomplish their goals, I think. Okay, so the story isn't really as fleshed out as the other games in the franchise, but it definitely beats the monotony of Swordcraft Story by a long shot. Chain of Memories, the only game that made card games extreme! Again, before 2009 came along. Well, Game & Watch strikes once again, and can you really blame me? These were solid games back in the day, And now with the color and the 16-bit capabilities of the Game Boy Advance, they became even better. Gallery 4 may not have the best selection or the easiest games, but dang, did you get a full package with this one. Again, I've gone through most of these games back in the Game & Watch countdown, so here's a quick rundown on some of the other ones. Donkey Kong 3 is hard. I still haven't made past 300 points. I call this one the only absolute dud of the collection. Rain Shower is admittedly one of my guilty pleasures, but can be boring if you're starting up. The real fun comes when you get around to 200 points, or, play hard mode. Mario's Cement Factory has a similar problem to Rain Shower, but mainly in the classic modes. Most of it is just waiting. Modern mode is where it's at, although I find myself getting really careless and land myself hitting the floor or the ceiling. Also, cookies! Donkey Kong Jr. in the third installment had a pretty bad glitch in the modern mode, and I'm really glad it's fixed up here. This is the definitive Donkey Kong Jr. game. Hands down, feet up, handstand. And then last but not least, there's Fire. It's a grand old time, and I am like a master at this game. The challenge is just right, the gameplay is solid, and I just have a great time every time I play it. These 6 games are worth the price of admission itself. But wait, there's more! Getting stars from being a complete boss can unlock you 5 more games with their own modern and classic version. But does that stop there? Heck no! This 4th installment goes even further, and allows 9 more classic versions of Game & Watch games, including Legend of Zelda for Game & Watch. Yeah, 9 games. 9! But it doesn't even stop there. In the Gallery section, there's a music box to play those sweet tunes. There's a present feature to see the credits when you're a complete boss. There's a museum to play and watch those 9 classics I mentioned earlier. And best of all, there's a complete history of every Game & Watch title in existence. And that, everyone, is why this game was the best game I ever paid $5 for. Now we're getting into the AAA titles of this handheld. And I mean the ones that really made a difference. The real game changers. This was, in fact, the last Wario Land game before our money-grubbing plumber got into the world of business. Sure, there was Wario World, which I don't know much about, and then there was Wario Land Shake It, which was good, even if it was a bit easy. Wario Land 4 was by far the best the franchise had to offer. That comes from how addicting this game was. The real fun of the game came from how satisfying everything was, from running to jumping to beating the crap out of everything in your path. The gameplay is truly what I expect out of a Wario Land game. Great combat, fair challenge, and money. The bosses are what I can truly call classics, as each one of them holds a really cool feature to them. For instance, Spoiled Rotten was a plum creature that was really easy to beat, but 2 things make him stand out from regular first bosses. The first one comes from that demented face he makes when he takes a lot of damage. The second one comes from his super hard mode fight. Just look at this guy playing through this boss. He deserves a medal. And there are a lot of other great fights, like the plant monster Cractus, the really original concept of the Cuckoo Condor, annoying Aerodent, and the Dark Knight himself, Catbat. But the best part of this game comes from the encounter of the final boss, the Golden Diva. Now this is what I call a fantastic finale. High stakes, great motive to defeat her, and the funniest final form I've ever seen. This game is a ridiculous improvement over the other 3 games. 4 times the charm. You hear that? That's the sound of a phenomenon. This may have been the 7th game in the franchise, but it was most definitely the first to many. The concept of a turn-based RPG was nothing new, but a game where you use strategy skills to tell units where to go and what to fight was just mind-blowingly new to the Western audience. In this game, you controlled an entire army of memorable characters, and you told them to kick some tail. There was just so much depth to this game. You had to manage weapons because they could break after a certain amount of uses. You had to make sure your characters were in good shape, because once they're gone for good. This game was incredibly hard, but that didn't stop anyone. Every time you complete a chapter, you get to see more and more of what I would call the best lore of a Fire Emblem game. That's what made this game so great. The characters were awesome. You wanted to see them make it through this conquest, and you wanted to see them grow because of it. If the game wasn't so cheap at times and gave you decent weapons earlier, then this would have been an easy second place. Heck, it could have been number 1. But the lack of good weapons early on just barely makes Fire Emblem get the bronze. It had been over 8 years since Metroid saw a new game in the franchise since the Super Nintendo. But then, gamers were graced in November 17th of 2002. 2 new games were finally making a debut and broke new grounds for that very series. Metroid Prime and my number 2 favorite Game Boy Advance game of all time, Metroid Fusion. From what I hear, Metroid Fusion borrows from the same physics engine as Wario Land 4, and boy does it show. This is one of the best, most amazing physics in a game that I have ever seen, and in a Game Boy Advance of no less. Aside from the gorgeous sprite animation, this game has 2 brand new features that have never since been seen in a Metroid game. For one, there was the ability to grab a ledge, which made platforming so much easier in a game like this. For another thing, the story was significantly stepped up. After the events of Super Metroid, Samus discovers a new breed of parasite that ends up nearly killing her. What saved her life was a vaccine created from the baby Metroid from the previous games. With a significantly altered powered suit and the horrors of the X-Parasite gone berserk, Samus embarks on her most chilling tale yet. Also, the bosses of this game are some of the best, and possibly some of the scariest. From the horrendous abomination known as the Nightmare, to the loudmouth Ridley, to the ultimate fearmonger itself, SAX. Alongside that, with fluid animation, great power-ups, and a chilling story with many twists and turns. What could possibly top Metroid Fusion? Well, I managed to find a game just a pinch better. And now for some honorable mentions. Pokemon Generation 3 was the game that even made fans swear their allegiance to the future installments, or broke the fans from the rest of the franchise. The 2 main games actually felt very different from each other, despite the same exact map and layout. Special shout out to Team Aqua and Team Agma. They made this generation awesome. SpongeBob SquarePants the movie is known by many to be the last great stand of SpongeBob reputation. But did you ever play the games though? Seriously, they have some solid platforming and great gameplay mechanics, and the Game Boy Advance version was no slouch either. And finally, Mega Man Zero would have made the main list if I was able to complete it. I'm a horrible Mega Man gamer, but I can recognize quality where quality is found. Actually, while I'm at it, this franchise ended on a 4, which is surprisingly common for the Game Boy Advance. Wario Land 4, Game & Watch Gallery 4, Super Mario Advance 4, Metroid Fusion is actually called Metroid 4. Sure, Valve can't count the 3, but Nintendo can't count the 5. But enough rambling. How about number 1? Superstar Saga. How did I miss this game during the Game Boy Advance run? Princess Peach's voice was taken by the evil witch Cackletta in order to use it on the Beanstar to take over the world. And it was up to Mario and Luigi to stop that from happening. The concept gave me one of those pressure-filled scenarios that I just couldn't deal with at the time, like how demanding Pikmin or Majora's Mask was. Fortunately, when I decided to give it a shot, I was hooked. All my fears were erased, and I eventually started to play a game that made my all-time favorites in gaming, period. The gameplay is unlike anything I've ever seen. You're in control of Mario and Luigi in a turn-based RPG. The catch is that if you press the right button at the right moment, you can do bonus damage. What's more, when it's the opponent's turn to attack, you can dodge and even counterattack. allowing experienced players to have more initiative replaying the game. Sure, Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario have done this concept before, but it was nothing as ambitious as this. You are in full control of the battle situation, and taking damage always depends on how well you play. But hey, this game played well, so I guess the story had to take a back seat, right? Absolutely not. While the story never has that sense of urgency, everything plot-wise stays pretty effective and can have that occasional twist and turn every so often. But the real strength in this game comes from the humor. This is by far one of the funniest games I have ever played. So funny, in fact, that it can rival classic cartoons like Ed, Edd n Eddy, classic SpongeBob, and heck, even go toe-to-toe against Manimaniacs and Bugs Bunny. It's seriously that funny, everybody. Special mention goes to Fawful, whose insane speech patterns can make anyone bust a gut. That about wraps up this month of handheld gaming. For as great as a powerhouse the console game is, nothing quite beats the innovation and creativity that a Game Boy can shell out. I'm Fawful the Lego. Until next time.